everybody's fear mongering, which is the Delta variant and a shutdown. So there's been a lot of conversations around mask indoor mandates, regardless of vaccination status. There's been some uproar about vaccine passports. There's been talk about what happens in the fall. And there's just, there is some certain fear about shutdowns. I personally don't necessarily want to speculate on that because it's anybody's guess. And honestly, in the chat, I would try to stick to stocks. Every time we have these conversations, I feel like people get a little bit off track and try to push their agendas. I think the point is that there's whether you like it or not, there's a real possibility that we could shut down. Or at least things will pull back. We're already seeing companies that are going, that are like pushing back their dates for stay at home and keeping people remote. What should people consider if they feel there's a risk that could potentially happen, or what are you looking at?
Well, I mean, I went into this, thinking like, is there a risk of an economic shutdown again? And I think there is a risk, but I think it's also very small. I think it's obviously something we should be concerning ourselves with, but also looking at some of the other outside global statistics to really kind of come to a realization is this going to be a long-term thing? And I think it isn't going to be a long-term thing, but it is important to also be well diversified. We talk about this, having, buckets of stocks that you think could go one way or the other. Some people approach this with what's called a barbell approach, having some of these COVID-related stocks and then the reopening plays. Make no mistake, me personally, and I think Fat Man Zoom would agree, still very bullish on the reopening and epicenter type stocks that have gotten beaten down as a result of the COVID pandemic is definitely still very much in play, and I would still remain overweight in those. That being said, if you want to take advantage of some of the short-term chop that we're seeing on the fear of the Delta variant and whatever variant comes behind it, I think that it's important to look at some of the stuff that's really gotten us here. You look at things like, and I'm not talking about highly speculative, high flyer tech. I'm talking about things like Zoom. Zoom Video, this is the perfect stock to be holding if you expect a potential shutdown or even a partial shutdown, or you don't. Because we've talked about how Zoom's going to be one in particular that's going to be around regardless of a shutdown or not. It's going to continue to benefit. We've talked about how remote work isn't going anywhere. And this is going to be one in particular that I think still does extremely well. We look at the chart and it's actually looking to start to form a cup and handle pattern on the daily chart. I really like this setup here, Fat Man Zoom, as it's continuing to hold above the 200-day moving average. And this is one that you can actually use to your benefit one way or the other. It's going to do really well if there's a partial shutdown or people are still working from home. It's going to continue to do well even when we have a fully reopened economy and the hybrid approach to work continues to stick around.
Yeah, I think that this is almost like a forced diversification strategy. It's going to be funny because I anticipate a lot of people getting hooked on like their belief on whether we should be shut down or not. That's not the point. Like that really isn't the point.
No.
Honestly, the same people last year were saying we'll be open by June. Nobody really knows, and I think that trying to guess what's going to happen, regardless of statistics, is a futile effort. And like it's something that like nobody can agree on in general, so what's the point? But what you can do is you can look at your portfolio and say, hey, if it does, then I have some stuff that should do well. And you should look at stocks that will do well, but if it doesn't, they still should be okay holds for you. And I worry that people are going to jump from portfolio to like with the portfolio from stock to stock, like, oh, I'm going to try to catch this and I'm going to try to catch that. This is forced diversification. So be paying attention to that. I am bullish on Zoom, regardless if there's a shutdown or not. But if there is, I'm hella bullish on Zoom. So I'll feel good about being in that position.
Exactly. The next one for me is going to be DoorDash. Now, DoorDash, if you guys haven't, if you guys recall, actually had a really good earnings call last time they reported and has done really well since. And this is, during when people were started really getting excited about a reopening. So since, mid-May, this has actually been doing really well despite people being optimistic about a reopening. And so that also spoke volumes to me that habits were formed during the pandemic. How many of you guys actually took advantage of DoorDash or Uber Eats or something like that during the pandemic, and then you've kept that habit? You're like, you don't want to feel like going out or whatever. You can get a DoorDash to send it to your home. And I think that DoorDash is set up to have another really good quarter, despite a potential surge in reopenings. But also, if we are worried about any kind of partial shutdown or any kind of shutdown whatsoever, then DoorDash stands to reason to believe that they're going to continue to do well, because one way or the other, I think that this is going to be another one that would be worth holding on to.
Yeah, DoorDash certainly should do really well. They're facing a similar challenge that Airbnb is, and I don't know if you've seen the ad campaigns as you're on social media, but with just getting drivers, and that's been a little bit of a handcuff for them.
Yeah.
If they address that, that could unlock massive profit potential.
Yeah, absolutely. The last one out of the three that I think are going to be the best ones to hold, whether or not we are in a shutdown or we continue to reopen. This is Walmart. This is something that actually has earnings this week, and we had it on Stockwatch Sunday. Walmart, in my opinion, has done, obviously we know that this remained open and they did everything they could for people that either wanted to drive by and just have their items dropped into their cars. Obviously the e-commerce side of things they've been doing really well on. And then it had this crazy pullback because everybody, I guess investors, and when I say everybody, investors in particular, institutions, spun this narrative that because we're going to be reopening, Walmart isn't all of a sudden as valuable, which I don't think is true. But if we do end up seeing another shutdown or what have you, then Walmart still stands the reason to benefit greatly from this. And it's pulled back to a reasonable level that I think is also a decent buy regardless of what's going on economically. And this looks like a really good setup. I like it at the 141 support level, which is also representative of its 200-day moving average. And it just looks like a really solid spot for Walmart. I would be really happy, really curious to see what comes of their earnings, especially from what we've seen from Costco and some of the other big box stores.
Yeah, guys, that's what you got. Top 3 stocks look good. I like them. Make sure you guys like and subscribe.